On the morning of October 11, 1854, the auction house on Charmer Street in Charleston became the scene of an event that people would quietly talk about for generations. A woman stood on the auction platform, her wrists tied with silk rope instead of iron chains. When the auctioneer struck his gavel for the last time, the final price climbed past $42,000. In today's money, that equals almost $1.3 million for a single human life. To understand how shocking this was, the most expensive plantation sale that same year, including the main house, 200 acres of rich cotton land, and 37 enslaved people, sold for only $38,000. There is no public record explaining why 17 different men competed so fiercely. No newspaper dared describe what truly happened inside that room. No official document names the man who bought her, though 3 witnesses later said he left Charleston the same day, traveling north with his purchase, and was never seen in South Carolina again. The Charleston Mercury archives contain a short mention of the sale buried on page 9 between shipping updates and patent medicine ads. Just 7 words: unusual proceedings at Ryan's establishment, nothing more. The next week, the newspaper's editor resigned without explanation and left the state. The week after that, Ryan's auction house shut down forever. Its records were sealed by court order, and the building was sold to a shipping merchant who turned it into a warehouse within a month. What made this woman more valuable than an entire working plantation? What secret did she hold that drove Charleston's most powerful men into a bidding war that bordered on insanity? What knowledge could justify a price so extreme that banks refused to handle the transaction normally, forcing the buyer to move the payment in solid gold? Before we continue with the story Charleston worked hard to erase, we need you to help uncover these hidden truths. Subscribe to The Sealed Room and turn on notifications, because stories erased this deliberately deserve to be told. Leave a comment sharing what you think this woman knew that was worth more than gold. We want your theories. Now let's return to that October morning when something unbelievable happened on Charmer Street. Charleston, in 1854, held a unique place in the American South. The city saw itself as the crown jewel of Southern culture. Cobblestone streets were lined with elegant pastel-colored townhouses. The harbor buzzed with ships carrying cotton to Liverpool and rice to Boston. The Battery promenades stretched along the water, where wealthy families strolled under palmetto trees swaying in the ocean breeze. Church steeples rose from every neighborhood, their bells marking time in a city that moved slowly and confidently, secure in its wealth and convinced it would last forever. The population exceeded 40,000 people, nearly half enslaved and half free. Yet real power rested entirely with perhaps 300 families who controlled plantations, banks, shipping firms, and every system that created wealth. These families knew one another well. Their fortunes were tied together through marriage, business deals, and social obligations reaching back generations. The Ravenels, the Pringles, the Haywoods, the Middletons. Their names appeared on deeds, bank charters, and the boards of every major institution. They dined together at the Charleston Club, worshipped at St. Michael's or St. Philip's, and handled business along Broad Street, where deals worth hundreds of thousands were sealed with handshakes between men who had known each other since boyhood. But beneath this polished surface, Charleston hid dark secrets. Every great fortune prefers shadows at its base. In a city built on enslaved labor, those foundations included buried crimes, quiet disappearances, and records never meant to be revisited. Ryan's auction house stood in a 3-story building on Charmer Street, just 2 blocks from the public market where enslaved people were sold every Tuesday and Friday like animals. Ryan's business served a wealthier crowd, offering privacy, discretion, and assurances that drew buyers from as far away as Georgia and North Carolina. Marcus Ryan had run auctions for 23 years and had earned a reputation for fairness in a trade where honesty was flexible. He kept careful records, verified ownership papers, and maintained strong ties with banks that financed purchases. His word mattered among men who trusted very few people. The morning of October 11th began normally. The first sales were household servants from an estate being settled after the owner's death, a cook, 2 maids, a coachman, and a gardener. They sold for expected prices to expected buyers. Ryan moved smoothly through the process, his voice clear as about 60 men sat in ladder-back chairs, fanning themselves against the lingering October heat. Then, at exactly 10:30, according to the pocket watch of cotton factor Benjamin Whitmore, who later testified, the mood shifted. A door at the back of the room opened. 2 men entered, escorting a woman whose presence immediately commanded attention. She stood around 5 feet 6 inches tall, unusually tall for the time, with posture so straight it suggested military discipline. Her skin showed a deep brown tone, free of the scars common on enslaved people forced into hard labor. She wore a well-made dark blue cotton dress with small buttons down the bodice, clothing far better than what enslaved people usually owned. Her hair was arranged in detailed braids that must have taken hours, showing she had access to time and help denied to most. But it was her face that silenced the room. Her eyes showed no fear, no shame, no submission. She looked slowly from one man to the next, as if studying and memorizing them. Several buyers later admitted they felt uneasy, as though she was judging them instead. The men escorting her looked like travelers. Their boots were dusty, coats worn from long journeys. More importantly, they carried themselves like men expecting trouble. Both wore pistols openly, unusual in an auction house where weapons were normally banned. Marcus Ryan stepped down from the platform, confusion visible despite his years of experience. He spoke quietly with the escorts. One handed him a leather folder. As Ryan read, his face tightened with shock, disbelief, and something close to fear. He looked at the woman, then back at the papers, then at her again. She met his eyes calmly. For a brief instant, the corners of her mouth may have lifted in a faint smile, though witnesses later argued whether it really happened. Ryan returned to the platform, gripping the papers. He cleared his throat twice. When he spoke, his voice held uncertainty no one had ever heard from him before. "Gentlemen, we have an exceptional lot today. The seller, who chooses to remain unnamed as permitted by South Carolina law, has consigned a woman estimated to be about 30 years old. No name is listed, so she will be identified as Lot 47. Her origin is Charleston, but no prior owner is recorded. She has no documented history of field or household labor." A voice from the middle of the room snapped, "Then what's her worth, Ryan? Why is she here?" Ryan's jaw tightened. His knuckles whitened on the papers. "The opening bid," he said quietly, "is $10,000. The silence was complete. Fans stopped moving. A clerk's pen froze mid-scratch. Even the noise from the street seemed to fade. $10,000 exceeded most men's yearly income. It could buy a large plantation, a grand townhouse, or a ship for overseas trade. For one woman with no listed skills, it was madness. "Have you lost your senses, Ryan?" someone shouted. Angry voices followed, but Ryan did not back down. Instead, he did something he had never done before. He read directly from the seller's statement, his voice growing softer with each line, forcing the room to listen. The seller submits a sworn statement notarized on October 6th. Lot 47 possesses specific knowledge of events and transactions involving certain parties between 1846 and 1853. This knowledge has been verified before 3 independent witnesses, whose identities are sealed for their safety. The buyer will receive instructions outlining when and how this knowledge may be disclosed. The seller guarantees its accuracy and confirms it cannot be forced from the property, as she has been conditioned to remain silent under coercion. Ryan paused, pale. The seller further states that any person connected to events at Magnolia Plantation on June 19, 1849, the warehouse fire of April 1851, or the maritime incident of September 1848 will understand the value of this lot. The seller accepts no responsibility for consequences should this knowledge become public. The reaction was immediate. Several men jumped to their feet, faces flushed. Others leaned back, eyes calculating. 3 men left the room at once. Yet no one demanded the auction stop. No one called it a fraud. Everyone understood exactly what they had heard. The woman held secrets, real names, real crimes, and someone was selling control of that knowledge. Ryan's voice trembled. The opening bid is $10,000. Do I hear 10,000? After a long pause, a hand rose in the back. 10,000, said a weathered plantation owner. 12,000, came another voice instantly. What followed was whispered about for years. The bidding surged beyond reason. 15, 18, 22. These men were no longer buying labor. They were buying silence, protection, survival. The woman never moved. Her face stayed calm as the price climbed, but her eyes watched everything. At 30,000, only 5 bidders remained. At 38,000, Cornelius Ashford, owner of 2 major banks, bid calmly. 40,000, came a voice from the shadows. Gasps filled the room. Ashford froze, fear twisting his face. He stood and left, hands shaking. The shadowed man stepped forward. He was tall, mid-40s, dressed simply in black. Those who knew him knew only the name Whitlock. He appeared in no records. 42,000, Whitlock said. No one countered. Sold, Ryan whispered. The transaction took 2 hours. Telegraphs were sent. Gold was carried in locked chests. When finished, Whitlock unlocked the silk rope, handed the woman a shawl, and offered her his arm. She took it. At the door, she turned back. Some of you will sleep better, she said calmly. Some worse. Knowledge once created is never destroyed. It only waits. Then she left Charleston forever. Inside was a single newspaper clipping from a Philadelphia paper dated 3 weeks earlier. The article was short and easy to miss, placed on an inside page between ads for patent medicines and notices about public talks. It announced that a private school for freed men and women had opened in Philadelphia, made possible by a large donation from an unnamed supporter. The school would teach reading, writing, basic math, and practical skills to formerly enslaved people trying to build new lives in the North. The article noted that the school's funding seemed generous, suggesting the donor had great wealth and a strong commitment to the education of Black Americans. There was no explanation, no note, nothing to say why this clipping had been sent to Calhoun in particular, but he understood right away. This was where the $42,000 had gone, or at least some of it. Whitlock had not bought the woman's knowledge for his own gain or for blackmail. He had bought it to pay for her freedom and her revenge, and now that her revenge had reached a certain point, the money was being redirected towards something that could build instead of destroy. Calhoun kept the clipping in his desk drawer and told no one about it, but he began reading northern newspapers more closely, looking for patterns and signs of the woman's continued work. He found them, though it took months of careful reading to piece everything together. In November 1855, a Boston law firm known for defending abolitionist causes received an anonymous donation of $15,000, allowing them to expand their efforts to protect fugitive slaves and challenge the laws that supported slavery. In January 1856, a community of freedmen in upstate New York received a large grant to buy farmland, giving formerly enslaved families the chance to start independent farms. In March, a Philadelphia publisher received funding to print and spread slave narratives, first-hand accounts of life in bondage that many Northern readers had never seen. Each donation came from a different source and passed through different hands, impossible to trace back to a single origin. But Calhoun saw the pattern clearly. Someone with deep resources and a clear goal was steadily funding the structure of abolition, strengthening escape networks, supporting legal challenges to slavery, and helping build a future where what she had endured could no longer exist. At the same time, new information about crimes in Charleston continued to surface. In April 1856, federal officials received detailed records of a bank fraud scheme that had operated between 1849 and 1853, involving the manipulation of cotton prices through coordinated false reports. 3 Charleston merchants were charged with federal crimes, and one took his own life before trial. In July, customs officials uncovered proof of long-running bribery, leading to the firing of 7 officials and criminal charges against 2 supervisors. Each case came with anonymous documentation so detailed and exact that it could only have come from someone who had been present when the crimes were planned and discussed. Someone who had stood quietly in rooms while powerful men spoke freely, assuming the enslaved servants nearby were incapable of understanding or remembering complex financial dealings. Someone who had listened to everything, remembered everything, and waited patiently for the moment when that knowledge could be turned into a weapon. Charleston's elite slowly realized what they were facing. This was not a single act of revenge or blackmail. It was a systematic teardown, a campaign meant to expose every crime, every plot, every hidden secret the city's powerful families had collected over decades. There was no way to negotiate and no way to buy silence, because the knowledge had already been sold, and the money was now being used to attack the very system that had allowed those crimes to happen. The psychological effect on Charleston society was deep. Even men who had committed no crimes beyond the everyday cruelty of slave ownership grew paranoid, wondering if their own servants were listening, remembering, and waiting. Trust broke down. Long-standing business partnerships ended in suspicion. Some families began treating their household servants with strange caution, afraid that any careless word might be overheard and recorded by someone patient enough to wait years before turning that information into destruction. As Charleston's social order slowly unraveled, a few people began asking different questions, not who the woman was or where she had gone, but how she had done what seemed impossible. How did an enslaved woman learn to read and write in a society where such education was illegal? How did she gain access to the private business dealings of the city's most powerful men? How did she record and protect information while remaining invisible to those she observed? And most of all, how did she endure years of continued enslavement while holding knowledge that could free her, waiting calmly for the perfect moment to turn that knowledge into maximum value? The first partial answer appeared in 1873, nearly 20 years after the auction. A Confederate veteran named Robert Ashford published a memoir about his wartime experiences. Among stories of battles and campaigns, he included a strange memory of a conversation he had overheard in Charleston before the war. In the spring of 1856, Ashford had attended a dinner where several older men discussed the auction scandal that had shaken the city. One man, identified only as a well-known rice planter, spoke with bitter respect about the woman who had caused so much damage. "We created her," the planter said. "We brought this fate on ourselves through our own pride and carelessness." According to Ashford, the man continued, "You want to know how a slave learned to read? We taught her. You want to know how she gained access to our business? We brought her into our offices and homes, treating her like furniture. We spoke freely in front of her because W.E. believed she could not understand us, and when she showed intelligence that unsettled us, we convinced ourselves it wasn't real, because admitting her intelligence meant admitting our crime." The planter grew quieter as he spoke. He admitted that she had served in his household for 3 years. He had watched her secretly teach herself to read, memorize conversations word for word, and understand financial discussions many men struggled to follow. And he had done nothing, because admitting what he saw meant admitting that he held in bondage a mind sharper than his own. That truth was unbearable, so he chose not to see, as did many others, and that blindness allowed her to become what she became, a threat so powerful that her knowledge alone was worth more than most plantations. Ashford's memoir drew little attention at the time. The war had ended years earlier, and few cared about old Charleston scandals, but later researchers would see this passage as a key piece of the puzzle. Another major breakthrough came in 1881, when a Philadelphia teacher named Catherine Winters published a collection of oral histories from formerly enslaved people living in the North. One interview, given by an elderly woman known only as Harriet, described a woman she had briefly known in Charleston. Harriet called her the most dangerous person I ever met, though she appeared perfectly obedient and unremarkable to those who owned her. Harriet said the woman had been passed between several Charleston households over more than 10 years, sold not because she caused trouble, but because she made her owners uneasy in ways they couldn't explain. She worked quietly as a house servant, efficient and silent, never drawing attention, Yet there was something unsettling about her, a sense that she was watching everything with an intelligence that should not have existed in someone legally defined as property. Harriet said the woman often stood quietly in rooms while white men discussed money, property, and schemes to make themselves richer. They forgot she was there. She appeared still and uninterested. But Harriet knew her secret. She was memorizing every word. She could repeat entire conversations weeks later with perfect accuracy, copying voices and gestures. Harriet said seeing this once frightened her so deeply that she never asked to see it again. Harriet also shared something essential to understanding the woman's method. The woman had told her that invisibility was the strongest weapon an enslaved person could have. If enslavers saw you as human, they watched you closely. If they saw you as property, as living furniture, they lowered their guard completely. She learned to make herself invisible by becoming exactly what they expected. And while invisible, she could see everything they tried to hide. Winter's book gained modest attention but little lasting fame. Still, Harriet's testimony later became one of the few first-hand accounts of the woman's methods. The most complete account of what happened after the auction did not appear until 1903, almost 50 years later. That year, a Boston lawyer died, leaving behind a sealed letter to be opened only after his death and shared with historians studying pre-war Charleston. His name was Jonathan Whitlock, the son of the man who had bought Lot 47. The letter contained his father's detailed account of the transaction. According to it, Jonathan Whitlock Sr. had been contacted in July 1854 by an intermediary representing an enslaved woman who controlled damaging information about Charleston families. She agreed to sell the information under strict conditions. She wanted a buyer with no ties to Charleston, a guarantee that the money would support abolition and her freedom, and control over how and when the information would be released to cause maximum harm to guilty parties while limiting chaos for the enslaved. Whitlock agreed. He verified the information, attended the auction ready to pay up to $50,000, and after purchasing her, took her north and secured her freedom. Over the next 3 years, she worked with him to release the information carefully and strategically. Whitlock described her as calm and controlled, not driven by visible anger. When he asked if she felt joy watching these men fall, she answered that joy required a freedom she did not yet fully have. This work, she said, was necessary, like removing infection from a wound. The letter finally revealed her name in history. Her name was Eliza Rothman, born in Charleston in 1824. She was the daughter of an enslaved woman and a Jewish merchant who never publicly claimed her. Her mother taught her to read and write in secret. After her mother's death, Eliza was sold repeatedly, passing through 7 households. In these homes, she gained access to private business dealings, memorized conversations, and recorded crimes using a cipher she created. By 1853, she had enough information to destroy powerful men, but she waited, knowing freedom had to come first. After completing her campaign, Eliza moved to Ohio and founded a small school for freedmen and women. She lived quietly until her death in 1897. Her obituary described her only as an educator. No one at her funeral knew what she had done or what she had cost Charleston's elite, but knowledge endures. Her records resurfaced over time, decoded, studied, and finally published. Her story changed how historians understood resistance, power, and memory. Eliza Rothman proved that the oppressed are never truly powerless, that those who demand invisibility create the conditions for their own exposure, and that truth, once preserved, waits patiently for the moment it is ready to emerge.